The vast expanse of the ocean stretched into eternity, an uninterrupted field of blue beneath a cloudless sky. Anne and Jack had sailed away in their boat, the Sea Ghost, under the golden glow of a perfect summer evening. For weeks, they'd been planning this trip. It was meant to be their greatest adventure yet, a peaceful escape from the world's worries. Yet as the sun dipped below the horizon, something changed. The last anyone heard from them was a brief call to their family, saying they were heading to a nearby uncharted island. After that, silence. The Coast Guard was notified within hours, but by then, their boat had already vanished without a trace. Weeks of search operations turned up nothing. No wreckage, no sign of distress, just an empty ocean that seemed to mock their efforts. Time passed and the mystery deepened, gnawing at the hearts of those who loved them. They were gone, and the sea kept its secret. Over the years, the memories of Anne and Jack's disappearance grew cold, buried beneath the heavy weight of unanswered questions and growing disbelief. But then, 32 years later, the Sea Ghost was found floating perfectly intact, drifting aimlessly, as though it had never left the harbor. The Coast Guard had been thorough, but even after exhaustive search efforts, nothing could explain the boat's strange return. The Sea Ghost showed no signs of wear or storm damage. It was as if it had never even left. There were no clues, no trace of Anne and Jack, no signs of distress, nothing that could give a hint as to their fate. Experts analyzed the boat from bow to stern. Every detail was scrutinized, yet the answers remained elusive. The ship's logs were empty, the food stores untouched. Even the small cabin, where Anne had kept her sketches, looked untouched, as though they had just disappeared. The boat was practically a time capsule, sitting frozen in time for 32 years, yet no one could explain how. Despite the eerie stillness of it all, the haunting question lingered. What happened to Anne and Jack? In the weeks that followed the discovery of the boat, the families of Anne and Jack were left in turmoil. How could something like this happen? The Coast Guard and investigators had run out of answers, but Anne's sister, Claire, refused to give up. She pored over the journals, the maps, and any scrap of information she could find. One night, as she leafed through Anne's old travel sketches, something caught her eye. A faint mark on one of the maps, a spot far from where they were supposed to have been. The mark had a cryptic note next to it: the Island of Souls. Claire's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the key? What was Anne trying to tell her? As the sun set that evening, Claire made a decision. She was going to find the island, no matter the cost. The mystery of the Sea Ghost and her sister's disappearance would finally have answers. With determination burning in her chest, Claire set off for the island. She couldn't explain why, but she felt an inexplicable pull toward it. Every instinct screamed that it was the key to unlocking the mystery of Anne and Jack's disappearance. She traveled by boat, making her way to the remote location, guided only by the faint markings in the journal. The further she went, the more eerie the atmosphere became. The sea grew unnaturally calm, and the sky seemed to darken, as if in warning. Claire's resolve was tested by the growing tension in the air. She was alone in these waters now, and nothing felt certain. As Claire approached the island, a strange feeling washed over her. It wasn't the feeling of adventure or discovery, but something darker, foreboding. The island was covered in thick mist, and as she stepped onto its shores, it felt as if the land was waiting for her. She looked around, searching for any sign of life, but the island seemed deserted. Yet, there was something in the air, something she couldn't explain. It was as if time itself was frozen, waiting for her to unlock its secrets. In the distance, she could see what looked like ruins, ancient structures that had long been forgotten. They seemed to call to her, and despite the overwhelming sense of dread, she moved toward them, hoping to find answers that might reveal what had really happened to Anne and Jack. The island, isolated and forgotten, held many secrets, but Claire wasn't backing down. She had uncovered something in the journal that hinted at more than just a peaceful getaway for Anne and Jack. The phrase "the Island of Souls" kept appearing in Anne's notes, with cryptic references to strange occurrences during their trip. There were accounts of locals whispering of an ancient power that ruled the waters around the island, something that had drawn Anne and Jack in like moths to a flame. The more Claire read, the more the story seemed to unravel itself. Something had lured her sister and Jack to this island, something darker than she could understand. Claire knew she needed to go back, to confront the mysteries of the island head-on. The authorities might have given up, but she couldn't. With newfound resolve, Claire set her sights on the island's northern cliffs, where she believed she might find answers. But with each step closer, the weight of the unknown pressed harder on her chest. Back on the island, Claire's footsteps echoed through the dense jungle as she navigated her way toward the northern cliffs. The path was treacherous, hidden beneath thick undergrowth and sharp rocks. The weather had turned ominous, with dark clouds gathering overhead. As she reached the edge of the cliffs, the view was breathtaking, an endless expanse of churning ocean crashing against jagged rocks below. But there was something unsettling about the sight. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the land itself was alive, watching her every move. Claire took a deep breath, steeling herself. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been here before her, waiting. The wind howled against the cliffs, sending the trees swaying and the sea below foaming with fury. It was as though the island was reacting to her presence. With no turning back, Claire pressed on, determined to find whatever had been hidden here for so long. As Claire made her way down the rocky path, she stumbled upon a strange formation, an ancient stone archway, partially buried in the earth, its surface etched with symbols Claire couldn't decipher. The air felt colder here, and a distant hum seemed to emanate from the ground beneath her feet. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was no ordinary structure. It was ancient, perhaps even older than the island itself. Claire knelt to inspect the symbols, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The air around her seemed to thrum with energy, like something waiting to be awakened. She ran her fingers over the carvings, trying to make sense of them, but it was like they were speaking to her in a language she couldn't understand. A sudden gust of wind blew through the arch, carrying with it an unsettling whisper, as though the island itself was trying to warn her. She stood, backing away slowly, unsure whether she had just uncovered a secret or unleashed something far more dangerous. Claire's mind raced as she walked back to her campsite, trying to make sense of what she had discovered. The symbols, the hum beneath her feet, it all felt wrong. But what unnerved her the most was the whisper she'd heard. It wasn't just the wind. The island seemed to speak, and it had a voice that was ancient, filled with warning. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. The air outside was thick with humidity, and every creak of the branches seemed to be calling her back to the stone archway. She knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. There were answers to be found, and they lay deeper within the heart of the island. The next morning, Claire returned to the archway, but this time, she brought with her a torch and a sense of determination. She wasn't going to leave until she had uncovered the truth, no matter what it cost her. The island was hiding something, and Claire was going to find it, even if it meant risking everything. Claire's heart raced as she returned to the archway, the torch casting eerie shadows across the moss-covered stones. She could feel the energy in the air building, almost as though the island was waiting for her to take the next step. With a deep breath, Claire stepped closer to the arch and placed her hand against the symbols, pressing gently. To her shock, the stone shifted, and a low rumble echoed beneath her feet. The ground trembled for a moment, and then, as if a hidden door had been unlocked, the stone archway slowly parted, revealing a narrow, dark passageway leading deeper into the island. Claire's instincts screamed at her to turn back, but the pull of curiosity was too strong. With one last look over her shoulder, she stepped into the darkness, the torchlight flickering as she descended into the unknown. Claire stepped into the darkness of the narrow passage, the flickering torchlight barely illuminating the stone walls that seemed to close in around her. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and each step she took echoed eerily in the silence. She was deep within the island now, and it felt as though she had crossed some invisible threshold. The further she ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the very ground beneath her feet was alive, watching her. The passage twisted and turned, leading Claire deeper into the heart of the island. She couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone, that something, or someone, was moving just out of sight. She hesitated, but then pressed forward, driven by a need to understand what had happened to Anne and Jack. The darkness swallowed her whole, but there was no turning back now. The island held its secrets, and she was determined to uncover them. The passage finally opened into a large cavern, its vastness dwarfing Claire's presence. The torchlight revealed strange markings carved into the walls, their meanings lost to time but unmistakably deliberate. The cavern felt ancient, its air stale and cold. As Claire moved further inside, the faint sound of water dripping echoed from deep within. The floor was uneven, covered in jagged rocks and scattered debris. But it was the altar at the far end of the cavern that caught her eye. Made of weathered stone, it looked like something out of an ancient temple. It was surrounded by candles that had long since burnt out, and the symbols etched into the altar were identical to those she had seen earlier on the island. Her heart raced. This was no ordinary ruin. It was a place of worship, a forgotten shrine hidden beneath the island's surface. What had Anne and Jack uncovered here? Claire approached the altar cautiously, her torch casting long shadows on the rough stone surface. The carvings on the altar seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as if the island itself was alive and reacting to her presence. She knelt beside it, running her fingers over the carvings, feeling a cold tingle run through her fingertips. Suddenly the ground beneath her shifted. The air grew even heavier, and a low, guttural rumble filled the cavern. Claire's breath caught in her throat as the altar began to move, its heavy stones sliding to one side, revealing a hidden chamber below. A gust of cold air escaped from the chamber, and Claire could feel the temperature drop sharply. It was as if the island had been waiting for her to discover this, and now it was inviting her to go deeper. With a mixture of fear and determination, Claire descended into the unknown, knowing she was about to uncover something that would change everything. As Claire descended into the hidden chamber, the air became thick with the scent of decay. The walls were lined with strange, faded murals depicting figures in ritualistic poses. Their eyes seemed to follow her, their faces twisted in pain and fear. The ground beneath her feet was slick with moisture, and Claire had to be careful not to slip as she moved deeper into the chamber. At the far end, she saw something that made her blood run cold. An open stone sarcophagus, its contents long since disturbed. The skeletal remains inside were arranged in a way that was disturbingly deliberate, as though they had been placed there for a reason. Claire's mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. This wasn't just a forgotten shrine. This was a tomb, a resting place for something, or someone that the island's previous inhabitants had worshipped. But the question remained, what had happened to Anne and Jack here? As Claire examined the sarcophagus, something caught her eye, a small, intricately carved amulet resting among the bones. She reached out to touch it, feeling a strange, almost magnetic pull. The moment her fingers brushed against the amulet, a jolt of energy coursed through her, and the chamber seemed to shift. The walls trembled, and the air grew thick with an unnatural pressure. Claire staggered back, the amulet now clenched tightly in her hand. The chamber began to glow faintly, the symbols on the walls coming to life. It was as if the island itself was awakening, reacting to the disturbance. Claire's heart raced as she realized that what she had just uncovered was far more than she could have ever imagined. This wasn't just a tomb. It was a key, a conduit to something far older and more powerful than she could comprehend. And Anne and Jack had been drawn into it just as she had been now. Claire emerged from the hidden chamber with the amulet clutched tightly in her hand, her pulse racing. The island felt different now, more alive, almost breathing beneath her feet. The air had shifted, heavy with anticipation. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward her, every rustle in the jungle whispered her name. She could no longer pretend this was just an archaeological curiosity. Something ancient and malevolent had noticed her. The amulet's glow dimmed, but its weight in her palm was unnervingly warm, as though it held a heartbeat. She remembered Anne's journal entries about the island's keeper, and realized they weren't metaphors. Someone, or something, guarded these secrets. The cult Anne mentioned wasn't a myth. It was part of a very real, very dangerous legacy. And Claire had just crossed a line that might be impossible to uncross. Pushing deeper into the jungle, Claire spotted movement, a flicker of white cloth vanishing behind thick foliage. Her breath caught. She followed, heart pounding, until the trees opened into a clearing. There, half hidden by vines, stood a weathered stone monument carved with the same symbols she had seen in the cavern. But she wasn't alone. A figure cloaked in tattered robes stood before it, motionless. When Claire stepped closer, the figure turned. Beneath the hood was an elderly woman with piercing eyes, her face painted with ash and crimson streaks. In a voice like wind over stone, she said, "You carry the key. You've awakened it. Now the island will feed." The words froze Claire where she stood. The woman introduced herself as Mora, the last keeper of the island's covenant. She explained that centuries ago, a cult sought immortality by binding their souls to the island's heart. Those who came too close were claimed, their spirits woven into the land. Anne and Jack, she said, had been chosen the moment they touched the water near the island. Claire's grip on the amulet tightened as Mora's eyes fell upon it. "That," Mora said, "is the seal. Return it to the altar and the cycle ends. Keep it, and the island will never let you leave." Claire's mind swirled with fear and disbelief. Could ending the curse also mean freeing Anne and Jack? Or was she just another piece in the island's endless game? Claire followed Mara through twisting jungle paths until they reached a lagoon, its surface perfectly still under the moonlight. In the center, on a rocky outcrop, stood another altar, identical to the one in the cavern. "Here," Mara said, "the veil is thinnest." The air was electric, the amulet in Claire's hand pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The reflection of the moon shimmered unnaturally, distorting as if the water were breathing. Claire felt a sudden urge to step forward, to place the amulet on the altar, but an equally powerful instinct screamed at her to run. Mora's voice cut through her hesitation. "Decide, before it decides for you." Claire stepped onto the slick stones leading to the altar, the amulet's glow intensifying with every step. The lagoon's surface rippled, though no wind stirred. She could feel eyes on her, not from Mara, but from the island itself. A low hum rose from the water, resonating in her bones. She reached the altar, placing the amulet on its surface. For a heartbeat, silence fell. Then, the water erupted into a whirlpool, glowing from below. Shapes, human, spectral, swirled within it. Claire's breath hitched as she thought she saw Anne's face in the torrent, reaching out. But the pull was strong, and she knew this was only the beginning of what the island demanded. The whirlpool's glow faded, leaving the lagoon eerily still once more. Claire stumbled back from the altar, gasping for breath. The amulet was gone, claimed by the depths. Mora stood silently on the shore, her eyes fixed on the water as if waiting for something, or someone, to emerge. Claire's mind raced with the vision she had just seen. Anne's face, pale but alive, reaching out to her. Was it real, or a cruel illusion crafted by the island? The thought burned in her chest. If the ritual had been the key to freeing Anne and Jack, then maybe it wasn't complete. The island's silence now felt heavier than any noise. Something had shifted, but whether it was victory or a warning, Claire couldn't yet tell. Mora finally spoke. "The bond is weakened, but not broken. To free them fully, you must face what lies beneath." Mora led Claire through a narrow canyon hidden behind the lagoon. The walls rose high, covered in ancient carvings that glowed faintly in the dark. She explained that the canyon led to the vein of the island, a place where all trapped souls gathered. The journey was treacherous, the ground slick with moss, and the air damp with a metallic tang. Claire could feel the weight of the island pressing in on her, the air vibrating faintly with distant whispers. Her fingers brushed against one of the glowing carvings, and an icy shiver raced up her spine. The voices seemed to grow louder, overlapping into an almost unbearable hum. She realized they weren't whispers, they were names. Thousands of them, and some she recognized. The canyon opened into a cavern, lit entirely by an underground pool of shimmering light. The surface shifted like liquid glass, reflecting strange shapes that weren't their own. Mora knelt at the edge whispering an incantation, and the water began to swirl. Faces appeared within, some peaceful, others twisted in torment. Claire's heart skipped when she saw Anne again, clearer this time, her lips moving soundlessly. Mara turned to her and said, "If you wish to save her, you must step inside. But know this, the island tests those who enter. If you falter, it will claim you instead." Claire's fear warred with her resolve, but she already knew her choice. Claire stepped into the pool, the icy water clinging to her skin like a second layer. The light intensified, and suddenly she was no longer in the cavern. She stood on the deck of the Sea Ghost, adrift in a black, endless ocean. The air was still, the sails motionless. Ahead, two figures stood at the bow. Anne and Jack turned to face her, their expressions a mixture of relief and fear. "You came," Anne whispered. But before Claire could speak, the ocean erupted, monstrous hands of water reaching for them. A deep, resonant voice rolled through the darkness. "One leaves, two remain." Claire understood the test instantly, and the cost it demanded. The hands surged forward, wrapping around Anne and Jack. Claire lunged, grabbing Anne's arm with all her strength. Jack shook his head, his eyes filled with silent acceptance. "Save her," he mouthed, before the water consumed him. Claire's scream was swallowed by the roar of the sea as she pulled Anne free. In an instant, the light shattered, and she was back in the cavern, gasping, clutching Anne's trembling form. The water in the pool stilled, the faces fading into darkness. Mora's voice was barely above a whisper. "The island always takes its due." Claire knew Jack was gone, but Anne was alive, and that was enough. For now. The cavern trembled as if the island itself had taken a deep breath. Claire held Anne upright, her arms aching from the weight of both the rescue and the cost. Mora's gaze was fixed on the now dark pool, her voice grave. "The balance has shifted. It will fight back." Claire didn't need to ask what she meant. Outside, the distant roar of the ocean was growing louder. The island's air was thicker, charged with a pressure that pressed against her chest. Anne's eyes were wide, confused but alive, whispering only, "Jack?" Claire's throat tightened. She had no answer. The ground beneath them gave a sudden, violent jolt. Mora turned sharply. "We must leave. Now." But Claire knew that whatever was coming wouldn't let them go so easily. They raced through the canyon, the once soft glow of the carvings, now a frantic pulse of red. The ground shook beneath them, dislodging stones from the cliffs above. Anne stumbled, but Claire caught her arm, refusing to let go. The air was filled with the sound of splitting rock and rushing water, as if the island's veins had burst open. Mora moved faster than seemed possible for her age, her robes whipping behind her. Every few steps, Claire glanced back and swore she saw shadowy shapes weaving between the trees, pacing them. They were not human. "Don't stop!" Mora shouted over the noise. "It's closing in." The path to the lagoon seemed impossibly far. They burst into the lagoon clearing, only to find it transformed. The once still water boiled violently, waves slamming against the rocky altar. Above, the sky churned with black clouds that seemed to spiral directly over them. Claire's heart pounded as she realized there was no safe path to the shore's edge without being pulled in. The shadows from the canyon had followed them, now forming into towering figures of water and mist. Mora slammed her staff into the ground, shouting words Claire couldn't understand. The figures hesitated, their forms flickering. "Go!" Mora commanded. "Get her to the boat!" But Claire knew what Mora's tone meant. She didn't plan to follow. Claire pulled Anne toward the narrow dock where the Sea Ghost now inexplicably waited, tethered loosely as if expecting them. The wind screamed in her ears, carrying 1,000 whispers. Behind them, Mora stood firm, her staff glowing with the same light as the altar had earlier. One by one the figures lunged at her, only to be met with bursts of blinding light. Claire hesitated at the boat's edge, torn between running and going back. Anne gripped her hand. "We can't lose you too," she pleaded. With a final glance at Mara, Claire shoved Anne aboard and leapt in after her, untying the rope. As Claire steered the boat away from the dock, lightning split the sky, illuminating Mara one last time before the shadows engulfed her. The sea ghost cut through the churning water with unnatural speed, as though the island wanted them gone. But Claire knew it was no act of mercy. This was exile. The whispers faded into the distance, replaced by the low, steady hum of the engine. Anne sat beside her, silent, staring back at the shrinking silhouette of the island. Claire tightened her grip on the wheel, her mind a storm of grief and unanswered questions. The island had taken Jack and Mara, and though they were leaving its shores, she knew its reach was far from over. The sea ghost glided into the harbor under a sky streaked with the first light of dawn. Claire barely noticed the curious faces gathered along the docks. Her mind was a blur of exhaustion and loss. Anne stood beside her, wrapped in a blanket, silent but breathing, alive. The salty air tasted different now, almost bitter. The island was far behind them, but Claire felt its presence lingering in her bones. She had returned but not whole. The authorities would ask questions, but there were no answers they could understand. As the boat drifted to a stop, the weight of the empty space where Jack should have been hit her harder than any wave. Reporters descended almost instantly, their cameras flashing, voices shouting questions. Claire shielded Anne from the chaos, guiding her past the crowd. She offered no explanations. How could she? To speak of the island, of Mara's sacrifice, of the shadows in the water, would only invite disbelief. A uniformed officer stepped forward, offering a hand to help them ashore. Claire ignored it, her grip on Anne's arm firm. Anne's eyes were distant, as though part of her was still trapped in that glowing pool. Claire knew recovery wouldn't come easily, if at all. The truth had followed them back, invisible but heavy, pressing on every breath. That night, Claire sat alone in a small motel room, the muffled sound of the ocean creeping through the window. Anne slept fitfully in the next room, murmuring in her dreams. On the table before Claire lay Jack's old compass, still damp from the sea. She turned it in her hand, watching the needle spin, not north, but slowly pointing toward something unseen. A part of her wanted to throw it away, but another part knew better. The island might be far, but it wasn't finished with them. Compass was proof. Or perhaps it was a warning. Days later, rumors began to spread in the harbor town. Fishermen swore they'd seen the sea ghost again, empty, drifting just beyond the reef. Others spoke of a strange fog that swallowed the horizon at night. Claire tried to ignore them, but when she stepped outside one evening she saw it herself. Far out at sea, a faint glow beneath the waves, pulsing like a heartbeat. She stood there for a long time, the wind cold against her skin, knowing it was a message. The island wasn't just calling, it was watching. In the quiet of her room that night, Claire wrote a single line in Anne's recovered journal. The island is never truly at rest. She closed the book and placed it beside the spinning compass. Oh, somewhere out there beyond the safety of the shore, the cycle waited for its next turn. The faces in the water, the whispering winds, the way the sea seemed to breathe, they would return. And when they did, someone else would vanish into the mist, leaving behind nothing but questions. Claire blew out the candle, and in the darkness, it felt like the island was smiling.